All right, so now we've built out the scene, we've added color to it. What we need to do next is breathe a bit more life into it by introducing light. Now, we will be exploring lights in depth in this course. This first section is to just kind of teach you the fundamentals, get you in here working and building projects quick so you can just hit the ground running in the future. We're not going to do a deep dive into lights here, but I'm going to go through the basic lights and the basic parameters. Now, the first thing you need to do is know how to turn on the lights. And you might be thinking, wait, aren't the lights already on? I see the scene perfectly. You're not wrong, but you're also wrong. So when you're in unlit mode, what you have is basically a light that is for working. It illuminates everything nice and evenly, and it has a good indication of form and shadow. But notice what it's lacking is directionality. We don't really have a sense of where the light's coming from. It's just kind of there. The other thing we don't have is things like shadows. So where are we going to get those from? Now, lighting is turned on per viewport, and you can see the light switch here to turn this on. If I flip the lights on now, you're going to see that this scene turns to black, and we can't see a thing. So by flipping the lights on, you kind of flip the lights off. So we're going to need some lights to be able to see what's going on. Now, for the first part of this, I want to show you some different light types. So I'm going to turn that off, and I'm going to come over to here and turn the lights on. Now, just to cover hotkeys, if you use the 7 key, that will be the hotkey for toggling your lights. So if you go ahead and hit 7, you'll see that is going to turn the lights. If you want to toggle them off, you can hit 6, which is going to toggle you to shaded mode. So you can toggle between 6 and 7 to flip the lights on and off. So let's go ahead and flip them off though, and let's talk about the first light, which we can access up here through the Create menu. If we come up here to Create and you go to Lights, you'll see several lights that you can access. We're going to go through the common ones that we see in different 3D applications, starting with the directional lights. We're not going to be doing these in order. We're going to be doing it in kind of order of utility importance. So if you go ahead and click that directional light, you're going to notice a pretty big change to your scene. Now, you might be wondering, where is this light? I'm going to teach you guys a very useful hotkey that you probably are going to yell at me for not telling you already, which is F, which is going to be for frame. Anytime you have an object selected, you can press the F key to frame your camera on it, which is going to make it so it is front and center in your camera, and it's what your camera is actually orbiting around. So inside of my work area, I'm going to press F to see this light. Now, unfortunately, I've kind of built this scene up so that the 0, 0 is covered, but this is what the directional light looks like. Now, the directional light is a light that casts rays in a single direction. That's why it's called directional. You can scale it up to make it more visible, but scaling it actually doesn't do anything. You can also move it around to be in whatever location you want, but that also doesn't do anything. What will do something is the rotation. As I rotate this light, you will see that it casts light in a certain direction. And the way it works is it basically just casts light infinitely from a direction here, all right? So that is going to be the directional light. Now, you might be noticing that we are missing a few things here, one of which is shadows. Shadows are not turned on by default inside of Maya. We have to toggle the shadows on and off in the viewport, so that way you can actually see them. The reason why is shadows are costly to render, and in a very complex scene, they can cause issues. Also, you don't always want shadows, so that's another thing to be aware of. But the button right next to the light bulb here, that will turn on your shadows. As far as I know, there's not a hotkey for shadows. There might be though. I usually just press the button though, and there we go. Now we have a sense of shadows here. And you can see what we're getting with this directional light is the ability to cast these nice long shadows into the scene. Now, talking a bit about lights options, some of the basic things we can control, if you go ahead and toggle over here to your attribute editor, we can access the lights controls. And you might have been wondering if we were ever going to use the attribute editor. Well, now's the time. It looks like it currently is on the directional light here, but we want to go ahead and click through these till we find the light shape. I believe the second one will be the light shape, and this is going to give us the basic controls for our lights. Now, when it comes to lights inside of 3D, no matter what application you're in, you're going to have two common parameters. You're going to have color and you're going to have intensity. These are fairly self-explanatory. Color, just like the color of materials, is going to give us color to our light. So if I click in here, you can see we can actually change the color of our scene, and we can see the light striking the surface here. Now, this brings us into a little bit of 3D mathematics. So since this is our first time dealing with light, let's go ahead and talk about what light is. Light works in an additive spectrum. What that means is we start with darkness or with black, and as lights are introduced, what happens is it reveals the scene through adding. All right. Now, what is added is intensity. All right. So intensity is what is added to black. In short, intensity is how bright it is. So if I go ahead and increase intensity, you'll see it gets brighter and brighter and brighter. So whereas an intensity of 1 gave us a feeling of a nice evening scene with this color, an intensity of 10 doesn't necessarily do that. As a matter of fact, it's so bright, it makes everything look like snow. The way light interacts with the scene at large and the way lights interact with each other is through an additive property, meaning that if I were to add another light to the scene, for example, if I were to come up here and create another directional light, the intensity is going to add together. So where the two overlap in intensity, we're going to get double brightness, but where the two don't overlap in intensity, we're not. And you can see that with the secondary shadow. Now, when light hits an object, it's going to perform a multiply function. So the way light strikes an object is you have your object, and what it's going to do is it's going to multiply. Now, this sounds a little bit strange, but when you think of the mathematics behind intensity, basically the 0 to 1 range is being multiplied by the color. So this is a little bit more complicated, but let's say you have something that is black. The mathematical value for black is 0, 0, 0. So if light were to strike a black object and it were to multiply it, and let's say we had a value of 1, the math produced would equal 0. Now, why did I use that as an example? For those of you who have had basic algebra, anything multiplied by 0 is 0. So, in short, if light strikes a black object, what happens is the black object doesn't reflect light, right? That's the reason it's black. So darker objects are going to be less reflective because of the multiplicative property, how it multiplies. But what's important to understand is that the color of light is multiplied in addition to the intensity, so you have to be careful with the color. To give you an example from a mathematical standpoint, opposites cancel each other out. So if we go ahead and come in here to magenta, and I have a strong magenta, we won't really have a good sense of green. We'll get more into that later on. But that is going to be the basic parameters, color and intensity, with color affecting how the color is of the light, multiplying onto the form. So what that means is basically whatever color you set, everything is going to be more like that color. So if you wanted a nice evening shot, we could use something like purples. If you wanted sunset, maybe get into the orangish reds. You wanted a nice midday, maybe we do a sort of white yellow color. And then intensity is the overall brightness. Coming back to the directional light itself, directional lights are ideal for faraway light sources. Generally speaking, they're going to be used to represent the sun, and if it's a nighttime scene, the moon. Okay. They are, however, just good for generically getting quick lighting as well. It's what I use a lot when I'm doing model presentations of my own, as well as doing renders for presentations at the company I work at. Okay, I'm going to delete that and we'll go to the next light here. So the next light is going to be something called a point light. And if I go ahead and introduce this point light, you'll notice that immediately we don't see an effect, and that's because shadows are turned on. It's inside of the ground. So since it's inside of here, we can't see it. So just be aware that if your light is inside of geometry and you have shadows turned on, you're not going to see it. But if I go ahead and move this up here, we'll see the effect this is having on the scene. Point lights are what we call omnidirectional lights. What that means is they go in all directions. You'll notice that position affects this, but rotation does not. Neither does scale. As a matter of fact, I don't think scale and rotation do anything to this at all. So a point light is just going to emit from the center. Notice it also has color and intensity over here. Point lights are used for anything that's omnidirectional, so anything that casts lights in multiple directions. A great example would be a campfire. So if we made ourselves a little campfire here, I can make this, nice and red, and we could kind of place this in here. Or if I wanted to kind of imply there was a campfire, well, maybe I could place this off into the woods here. I'd probably have to turn the lights on my other scene to get a better feel for it. But we could kind of imply that, hey, maybe someone's having a campfire over there. We don't even need to add in any fire effects because it's just kind of implied, which is pretty cool. Other things it's great for is light bulbs. So point lights are one of those things that is used a lot because light bulbs are everywhere. When it comes to interior lighting, you're going to see a lot of point lights. The next one is going to be the spotlight. The spotlight is another really common light that we see inside of 3D applications. The spotlight is designed to act like a stage light, like a spotlight that points in a singular direction. It has a few more controls than the other lights do. It responds to rotation. It responds to position. Scale doesn't affect these ones, but in certain applications, it does affect them. So just be aware of that. But you can see this can be great for things like flashlights or anything that casts a beam of light, including interior lights. A few other things that are really cool about Spotlight is the cone angle, penumbra angle, and drop off to affect the light shape. These are designed to simulate barn doors on film lights. So those are the little gates on the side that make it so you can shape the light, essentially. So the cone angle here, you can see will make it bigger or more narrow. So we could control that. The penumbra angle is going to be the softness of the outer ring. So we can either make it hard or soft. And the drop off is how much it falls away from the middle. So you can do a lot of really nice mood lighting here. So let's say I wanted to just kind of splash some blues onto the mountains here to give them a little bit more of a faraway look to the scene. I could come in here with this effect, maybe play around with my penumbra angle or my drop off, and just play around with that angle there. Might take a little bit of experimentation. I'm positioning it in one view and looking at it in another. But we could play around with that and just add like a splash of blue back there. And let's go ahead and just make that intense sky blue. So something like that. And if I go ahead and pair that with my directional light now, you can see that that helps contribute a little bit more blue to there, especially if that gets into the shadow and makes those read a little bit more like blue lights. And if I play around with the color of this light, you can see if I push this to be kind of a dark yellow or red or whatever, because lights are additive, that's still maintaining its blue appearance. So we can do some nice little splashes like that. I'm not going to do that though. We're going to leave that alone. And those are the basic lights. So directional, point, and spot. Those are going to be what are in a vast majority of 3D applications. If you're going into the different game engines like Unity or Unreal, if you're going into other 3D applications like Blender or 3ds Max, you'll have access to these. Now, some of the other lights in here are specialized, and we're not going to get to those because they're not going to work with what we're doing. But there is one light I want to show you, which is the ambient light. Now, we're going to use the ambient light in our particular scene for a specific reason. We're going to be using legacy rendering techniques for this scene. So what that means is we're not going to be delving into the super advanced rendering techniques. We're going to be getting to those in future projects, but I want to show you guys how to create a beautiful scene with the most basic tools inside of Maya. So let's go ahead and introduce this light called the ambient light and talk about it and why it's not used anymore. Notice this made the scene look very flat and very cartoony. That's because what this has done is it's cast ambient light across the entire scene. What that means is it has an even flat light affecting everything. Now, what is the purpose of this? The purpose of this is to capture global illumination. That's the phenomenon where light is bouncing all around us and kind of filling in the blanks with light. So when we go outside and you look at something like your shadow, you might notice it is not completely black. So let me delete this ambient light. And let's go ahead and take a look at the directional light to give context to why I'm mentioning this. If we take a look at the shadows in the scene, notice that with the directional light, they are completely black. This isn't how shadows are in the real world outside. In a studio environment, you can control this and you can create a film noir style effect. But in the wilderness, in the forest, this isn't how they look. So the purpose of ambient light is to capture that light that is ever present through things like the sky. If I go ahead and create a light and create an ambient light here, you can see how that fills those in and gives us really nice looking shadows compared to what we had before. So the purpose of the ambient light is to simulate this. Now, where was this used and why is it not used anymore? This was used in early movies like the original Toy Story to create the lighting outside for things like the sky. Later on, better mathematics were developed to create formulas that calculate global illumination. And with more advanced rendering algorithms, these were made obsolete. So these actually don't even work in most renderers. They mainly are here for the Viewport renderer to give us an option to simulate global illumination. Currently, as of the making of this, global illumination is not that achievable in real time. Game engines have various ways of faking it to look decent, but real-time global illumination is still a long ways out from development. So this is a way we can fake it here in the Viewport. All right, so with that, we can adjust things like the intensity to control how intense those shadows are. We can also change things like the color to change the overall ambient lighting of the scene and really affect the mood or time of day that we're trying to capture. Now that we've taken a look at the basic lights, we've taken a look at color intensity, we've taken a look at placement, I want to give you guys the challenge of lighting your scene. So feel free to get creative. I'm going to be very boring with mine. I'm going to do a very basic outdoor scene, but think about how you could add in maybe something like a campfire in the woods. Maybe you could do an evening scene. As a matter of fact, maybe I'll experiment with that myself. It actually seems really appealing. Or think about how you might splash a light on the mountains to add some color variation and have some fun with it. So go ahead and do that challenge, do some experiments. And then once you're done with that, come back and I'll take you through my process and you can copy me or we can do it together if you want. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at this for just a basic daytime scene. What I would do with the directional light here is I'd find a nice angle that gives me what I want. I'm going to want to look at the angle and the lighting in my shot camera. That's something that I probably should have told you before the challenge, but hey, it wouldn't be a challenge if it wasn't a challenge. And I'm going to go ahead and just find how I might like this to go. So maybe something like this that looks like a nice afternoon sunlight. I'm going to come over here and set my color to be a sun color, like a yellowish orange. And then I'm going to go ahead and take my little ambient light here and set this to be a nice sky color. We could set this to be something like sky blue. And with that, we get a fairly nice looking exterior. I could use the intensity here of the ambient to kind of just dial that back. And you can see we have a nice afternoon exterior scene. But let's say we wanted to have a little bit more fun with it and try that nighttime scene out. I'm kind of curious about that experiment. So let's go ahead and kill the ambient light for now. I'm going to find a nice moonlight shot here. And when I think of the nighttime in terms of just style, I like to think of either cool blues or violet. So I'm going to do a nice violet style light here. I'm going to make sure it's dark in the value. If you have a dark value in the color, that applies to intensity as well. You could bump this either way, but that'll give us a nice look there. Then we need to fill in those shadows with something. I want it to be a nice nighttime scene, but I also want the shadows to look okay. So I'm going to come in here with an ambient color and maybe experiment with some different looks. Maybe this would look better pushed more towards a blue color. Experiment with some purples. I'm thinking a lighter blue color actually would be nice for this. So we could create a nice little setup there. And let's introduce some other lights. If we want to have that story going on, that maybe there's a campfire in here, I could add in a point light. We could go ahead and maybe throw this back here in this area that we can't see. So that way we get the idea that maybe there's people camping back here. Go ahead and maybe set this to a nice red color. And for this one, I could play around with the intensity to make it a little bit stronger. I don't really like how that shadow is being cast there, which is kind of unfortunate, but there are ways we could control that. I could also just kind of change the placement of it so it's in a different spot for this particular narrative, which I kind of like. And something like that could give us a bit more of a story there in terms of what's going on in the scene. Now, I think I'm just going to go back to the daytime setup, but it's cool to kind of see how a scene looks with different sort of lighting scenarios. Since I originally intended this scene to kind of be just a simple daylight scene, let's go ahead and come back to that. Go ahead and get my nice sun dial going here. and come back into the ambient light here. Just go ahead and push that to be a little bit more sky-like. Nice sky blue there. And then we can adjust the intensity here to find how we want the shadows to look. I'm liking the way it looks. I think I'll call that good. Maybe play around with the intensity just a smidge more. It's feeling really strong in the blues here. There we go. I think that's getting me closer to what I want. We'll call that good. So hopefully you had some fun lighting your scene. It's always amazing to see how big of a difference light can make, as we saw between the daylight scene and nighttime scene. With that, let's go ahead and continue down our journey here and start exploring how we can beautify this in preparation for rendering and produce our first image from Maya.